Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and of course I'm joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and we're going to talk about Mozambique, so can you go into it, John?
Yeah, well, Mozambique is starting to hit a higher inflation. Like, I always like to look at numbers, and Mozambique's inflation numbers are currently lurking around 16.77 over the last year. That's actually quite substantial when money's value decreases that much very quickly over a year. And
absolutely.
So I always keep my eye on it, and I then take a look at different news and what's happening in that country. And I found some very interesting things that's going on. There was a recent article just recently about how last week IMF was actually down in Mozambique and looked at some IMF loans that was sent out there, and they actually found a little bit of money that wasn't disclosed even by the IMF. It was $2 billion that was borrowed to Mozambique, which only 850 million of that was accounted for.
Damn, IMF has their hands in everything.
Yeah, and this money was actually given to, I'll tell a little bit of a quick story about what's happening in Mozambique. Mozambique, the state owns what's called GIPS, and it's investment of state security and intel services. They own 33% of Ematum, which is the Mozambique big tuna company that's, of course, owned by the state.
Yeah.
And they own 98% of Mozambique Asset Management, MAM, and 50% of Proindicus, which is intended to provide maritime security services. So there's a lot of security services there.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting. But I looked at the IMF loans, and what they found out was there was under the contract in 2013-14, which was under the prior precedent that they had under President Armando Guebuza. He actually took loans from the IMF. I said $2 billion. Now, only 850 million of that was disclosed, and it went to Ematum to buy a massive new fleet of tuna boats to go and fish tuna out in the ocean. Now, what is interesting, that $850 million was actually out on the Euro bond market, so European banks bought bonds there. The problem now is they're all basically bankrupt and they can't pay it back, which is not a surprise when it comes from the IMF.
Of course not. That's how it works. That's part of their monopoly.
Yeah, so $622 million went to Proindicus, and 535 million were also not disclosed, that went to the Mozambique Asset Management Company. And it wasn't disclosed by either Mozambique or their international partners, including the International Monetary Fund. Interestingly enough, that the International Monetary Fund, the big government body that tried to lend money to people, they didn't disclose it. It's funny enough.
Well, okay, go on.
So
this is pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I looked a little bit about their CPI has risen quite substantially, which is, I don't really look at CPI too much. It's manipulated by governments.
Yeah.
Their US dollar to the Mozambique Metical, which is their currency, I looked at the rate over the last 5 years, and it's risen from 28.25 to $1 US to now 62.25. Well, that is 220% inflation in their currency there, which is very substantial if you do a lot of trade. And they actually have quite substantial trade deficit. It's negative $1.75 billion. So that means that they need a lot of US dollars to get in. And by that, it takes so much less of the Mozambique currency for them to buy that. So they're really suffering from that. And of course, they sold 50% of their gold reserves.
Of course, that we always see that in a failed
2015 to
country,
2016, and exports are just dropping like a rock. Now, the tuna company actually that got that $850 million, 500 million of those got moved into the defense budget of Mozambique. So literally, IMF funded the defense budget of Mozambique, their military.
Okay, well, like going into this a bit, it seems that Mozambique from the beginning was kind of like a very vulnerable people that got taken over many years ago by more communist sort of centrally planned collectivist idea, and they, people took advantage of their vulnerability to enforce this horrific kind of monetary union control over Mozambique, and it's so similar to so many of the issues we see globally between from everywhere from like Canada to Europe, from Asia through the Middle East. We're seeing this. It's a globalist issue. It's completely taking a hold of the entire planet, heading towards a financial collapse of global calamity per se. And can you kind of go into just quickly what this means for Mozambique going forward?
Well, it means that they're in a huge problem right now. Their credit rating is crumbling, which means that it's going to be very hard for them to get money. Their credit rating is, I actually look at the new trading economics measurement because it's so much better than both, like all the three major ones, because they take all the three major ones plus they look at economic indicators, so you get a way more accurate one, and they have like 30 out of 100, which means that they're basically close to bankruptcy, and an extremely risky investment to put any money into Mozambique government bonds. So if Mozambique tries to give you more government bonds, please stay away from them. It's highly dangerous, and because they have a centralized government that likes to spend money.
Well, let's get away from, and this is for everyone in the world that's watching, and especially those in Mozambique that are watching this right now. You have to get away as individuals from the central banks and the government that are trying to control you and use you as pawns in a game of chess in order to sacrifice you for the king and the queen. And I keep trying to make this point because it's you that suffers. It's a government, it's a banking system that profits, that prevails over top of you by using you as basically a sacrifice. And you guys need to stand up against your government. You guys need to stand up against the central banking powers that be, and you guys have to demand individualism, because you are free human beings from your birth to your death, and it's a government and it's the central banking powers that use you and take advantage of you and try and plunder your free will, your freedom, your humanity, and it's up to you to stand up against them, because you are free, beautiful human beings, regardless of what laws, what paperwork they put in place to say you're not. You have an ability to stand up against these people. You just have to stand up together, and you have to work fast, because the longer you put this off, the longer you're apathetic, the more you're going to get used, and then you're going to turn into Zimbabwe, you're going to turn into so many of these nations, Venezuela, that are completely plundered to the point where there's nothing left, and people are fighting each other for a loaf of bread. When we see inflation rates like this, and we see the IMF trying to take control of these nations, you people have to stand up. I don't know how else to put it, John. It just seems like we keep saying this about every nation on earth, because of course globalism is taking hold of the entire planet and trying to plunder people's free will, their monetary system, printing money out of thin air, creating inflation and debt, vast amounts of debt in many countries, paying off the interest on the debt. It's disheartening to see this continue on from country to country to country, and we've watched, as we've done so many reports, as this just continues to carry on to the next, to the next.
Well, there's always a story that are in here. It's the monetary system and the IMF usually that are borrowing money to these corrupt nations and corrupt leaders. Yeah,
we got to get away from the globalists. We got to get away from the Rothschilds, Rockefellers. We got to get away from George Soros, these big bankers, and the people that control the big bankers, the central bankers.
Yeah, this is a message to Africans. Africa is so ridden in massive amounts of great commodities. Mm-hmm. Take ownership over your own commodities. Don't let these your local governments sell you out for your future.
You can live rich lives apart from these control-freak collectivist governments that have controlled you since before you were born, because of course a lot of people aren't used to freedom, so they don't know what it feels like. But I'm telling you, good people of Mozambique, it's your right to stand up against those collectivist fools that try to control you and try and run you into the ground for their own profit. And it is up to you, because there are so many commodities in your country that you could take advantage of, harness, and as free individuals profit and have an entire rich country instead of a rich oligarchy that's controlling the people who are living in poverty. So it's so important. Thank you, John, for going into this. This is such an important point to put out to the good people of Mozambique and other countries throughout Africa, throughout South America, all these countries that are taken advantage of for their vulnerability from, first of all, because they have been controlled and plundered since before we can even think back. It just goes back so far, and it's up to these people to stand up. And this goes for all countries on earth. We as individuals, we are free human beings. We have to stand up to the centralized powers that be that are controlling us and plundering us and driving us right into the ground, because we do not succeed at the end of this story. The climax is that we are gone, we are enslaved, but it doesn't mean that we are going to win. We need to, as free human beings, stand up and make sure that we win and get away from these collectivist powers.
Don't let your government nationalize your fishing fleet. Like, go out and be your own fisherman and start by yourself having that individual business instead of letting the government run the show.
Teach a man to fish and he fishes in his entire life. So thank you very much, John. This is Josh Sigurdson, John Sneisen, signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.